Hey, welcome to Tiny Mike Micro News. I'm your host, Lindsay, and in case you missed it, I'm starting something called Pass the Tiny Mic. Now, as human beings in this endless grind culture, we typically don't think about the things that don't apply to us or don't affect us. And that's the problem, IMO. So, in an effort to expand my own awareness and knowledge of things that don't always apply to me, I'm going straight to the source. We are going to hear from one of the raddest people I know, my dear friend Max. Max is a happily gay, happily married, multiply disabled expat who is fueled by equal parts rage and compassion. I am so excited for you to hear what he has to say. I was served up an entirely new level of awareness, and I think you will be too. Let's define ableism for me and for anyone listening who may not be fully aware of what that means.
I think the one that really gets closest to like the crux of it is the first one I found. It's this website is called accesslegend.org. Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. When I read that, it didn't quite hit me right. And so, from my perspective, at least, the belief that these typical abilities are inherently superior, that
Right.
the person without a disability of any kind, the things that they can do are inherently superior because they, on like a social end of the spectrum, fit into, a larger society of people that, mostly don't have disabilities. But it's also the idea that, your inherent superiority comes from your inherent ability to produce and to create capital and to contribute to a capitalist society. And that's, why I think it's a little bit risky, an oversight to just say it's just that a belief that typical abilities are superior. It's the belief that they're inherently superior, like by virtue of your birth, your ability to produce more capital in however you want to do that term makes you a superior, or in a lot of cases, a more whole and complete human being.
I think that, first of all, we need to get you in there to rewrite that definition to add that, because this society does function on that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We see it all the time. Like, you and I, we had retail jobs together.
As an able heterosexual cisgender white man, he is the one entire person. And anyone who starts to fit into any marginal group loses a bit of personhood, what they can produce, in terms of, employment and bringing in money for the whatever, but also, ideas and culture and things like that. And disability is a huge part of that. It's, if you're seen as disabled, the assumption is that you can't do the way that others do. Therefore, you are a drain on society, and you are less than that one whole human being.
Oof. You have a unique perspective that most of us don't, if I'm being quite honest. And I think that perspective should be amplified. So please take this tiny mic from me.
Okay. Yeah, let's see, where even to begin. People who are working to dismantle and to disrupt all of these, overlapping oppressions that occur in these communities that are trying to speak out and call something racist, to call something sexist, to call something ableist are being met with such backlash, for tons of reasons. And a lot of those reasons is that lots of people are just assholes and like things the way they are. But there is definitely a segment that when people hear that word, they hear someone being called a racist or, ableist. The assumption with that is that and somebody who outwardly has this kind of, negative, bitter prejudice against said group. But the whole pervading, parts of basically any of these, oppressions that are happening to whatever minority group you're talking about is that, it's built into the structure of everyday life from the most like metaphysical to the most physical, concrete version of that word. Because ableism is, all of the things that we already talked about, but it's also a lack of, physically accessible, like entryways to buildings. It's a lack of accessible subtitles and closed captioning for videos. It's a lack of accessible software for vision impaired people. The same website, accessliving.org, really hit even better than the definition, which is the world wasn't built with people with disabilities in mind. And because of that, the world we live in is inherently ableist. And so, if we want to talk about how that affects my life, it affects it in every single way. There's no part of my life that has been safe from the rest of the world, because that's what it is. It's how every single thing is structured.
All of the things that I take for granted and most of us take for granted, you are having to work so much harder to access. There, I'm getting fired up. Okay. Okay. Talk to me about disability as something to overcome.
The word overcoming makes it seem like disability is itself the obstacle, and it shifts basically the responsibility of, just trying to function in daily life onto the disabled person, when in reality, the obstacle is a structurally ableist society, and, in many instances, an individually, interpersonally ableist society. And so, we don't do things as a means of overcoming our disability. Like, just because I can, go play the guitar and, do it decently, doing that does not mean that I've overcome my disability. Like, it didn't suddenly give me the ability to like sprout arms and fingers. Like, it's not something that needs to be overcome. And that was another note that I made. Disability is equivalent to a brokenness that needs to be fixed in order to be a complete and like okay person. You do things in a different way than other people, or there are some things that you can't do that most people can do. That is a flaw of your humanity, and it's not a flaw that you've chosen per se, but it's a flaw that makes you a little bit less in their eyes. And whether they can consciously be aware of that or not is something different, but that is essentially what they're saying. So when you say, oh, he overcame his disability and climbed a mountain, like, he didn't overcome his disability, he overcame the ableist obstacles that were in his way.
Boom. Like, as Oprah would say, that is a tweetable. Okay.
Yeah. So there are the two most common tropes that, we'll see news, like it's not just, fictionalized scripted things, it's often news stories, biographical accounts of people. And those are the super clip, which is a play on the word cripple, that people of that genre, physical disability, have reclaimed that word. And then there's also the concept of inspiration porn. They're both really harmful, and they're basically both designed and scripted to be consumable by the non-disabled public as a way to make themselves feel better. And it's all means to that end, to be consumable, to be like, something that they can take in. And it really has very little to do with portraying a disabled person as any type of person at all. There's always the implicit question to the abled audience of like, well, what's your excuse? But pushing all of that aside, it's taken all of the humanity away from this person. And using it as like,
motivation.
Fuel.
Fuel. Like that sucks.
It's like, wow, like it's amazing that you did that, and even more amazing because you're like an inherently inferior person to me.
It completely dismisses the effort and the work of a human being accomplishing a goal.
Yeah.
Face that. How do you, Max, stand against that or cope with that?
That's a good question. Because okay. So for most of my life, I didn't, because I wasn't given the space to realize and allow myself to realize how poorly I was being treated. Congenitally disabled people who grow up and begin childhood as disabled, we internalize very early on and continuously throughout our development that we're not entitled to any sense of boundaries, of personal boundaries, having to undergo invasive medical exams and conversations, that on the necessary end, to the conversations with nosy doctors who you're visiting for something completely unrelated that feel that they're still entitled because they have an MD and, it's technically to do with their patient, all the way to the other end, which encourage the child to be open to answering questions from kids or adults at any time, and to basically make them be like these beacons of like education when they're just out in the world trying to exist.
What do you wish people knew?
Like, the answer is there's no one thing that I want people to know, because the disabled community is not monolithic. Like,
I hope passing the tiny mic has made you more curious about yourself and the world around you. Because remember, there is no voice too small to be heard. So keep your ears open, keep your heart open, and we'll see you next time on Tiny Mic Micro News.